Okay, let's call this meeting of the Hindley Homes and Royal Building Committee to order at 6:01 on December the 6th, 2023. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Hang on just a second. Okay. First order of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting from the November 15th meeting. Can I get a motion to approve those, please? Sarah moves. Jameson seconds. All in favor? Aye, unanimous. Great. Is there any public comment from members of the public? Molly Hirsch, I see you've joined. I'm not sure I have been introduced, or we have been introduced.
Molly is the Darien Times reporter.
Oh, okay, great. Hi, Molly. Other than Molly, then it doesn't look like there are any members of the public to comment. Chair's report. Really, the chair's report, the gist of the chair's report is going to be the substance of this evening's meeting, which is everyone involved on the design and the construction team, and particular thanks to David Martin and Kevin Monrette, have been working very, very hard over the past 2 weeks to do scope review on the trade bids and to get us a lot closer to what we think our overall budget's going to be, so that at the risk of skipping to the end of the agenda, which we'll talk about the appropriation schedule and process to get us into a position where we know just how much we're going to ask for. Dave and Kevin Monrette spent a lot of time and a lot of focus on analyzing and estimating soft costs. And in addition, Travis and Sue Davidson, and with the help of Patrick Hayes and Dave Martin, worked very, very hard on getting some clarity on the FF&E, all of which is now then wrapped into the GMP cost summary sheet that Laurel produced, and that was sent around maybe 15 minutes ago or so. So hopefully, if people haven't checked their emails, take a look at your emails. There's a bunch of attachments that if you wanted to either print them or look at them separately from the screen share, there's a summary with a big red letters says draft at the top that Dave Cravenzola prepared that I forwarded, and then a GMP cost summary sheet that Laurel had prepared. And then earlier in the day, Dave Martin had sent around more detail on the soft costs, and I had forwarded the preparation that Travis and Sue Davidson had done on the FF&E. So those should all be in your inbox, either for you to review while we're on this call or afterwards. But with that, I think what I'll do is turn it over to Laurel and Dave to bring us up to date on how the scope review has gone. I assume, Laurel, that the GMP cost summary sheet reflects the discussions and results of the scope review, and kind of let us know where we are vis-a-vis the various trades and how the scope review went.
Yes, that's correct, Chris. So we are done with our scope reviews. We finished conducting them as of November 29th, which was what we were anticipating. The numbers that I sent and included in the GMP cost summary are reflecting where we are today. There is still one trade contractor that we are carrying the second bidder, and that's for the casework. It's bid package 1.06. I am carrying the second bidder's numbers because when we did scope Connecticut Carpentry, they were one of the final contractors that we scoped last week. They're hemming and hawing, so we may not, their low bid may not be valid, but it's still undecided. So knowing that we don't want to keep increasing, I'm reflecting the second bidder for 1.06 for all three schools. All of the rest of the bids are who we think would be the lowest qualified responsible bidder. So everybody else has been vetted.
I know you were. I know there was some question about, was it Grasso as one of the site prep contractors?
Yes.
Where did that
Yes.
shake
Yeah,
out?
So, yeah, when we first, and I'll let Tom talk, but when we first read the bids and I first prepared and presented numbers, we were carrying the second bidder, Richards. But after conducting the scope review, and I'll let Tom Walsh talk about all the follow-up work that he did to further vet them. Long story short, I'm carrying Grasso's number now, but I can let Tom explain what he did.
Chris and team. So I've had extensive conversations with Grasso's estimator and Joe Grasso about their number and their comfort with their number and their willingness to do the job. So they are totally on board with their number. I've taken an additional step. We have a bond form that AP uses that's been developed by Travelers and some other sureties that has an accelerated performance requirement. So I've presented that form to Joe Grasso as something that would benefit us, and he'd be required to use that bond form instead of the standard AIA 312 bond form.
So now would Grasso be the site prep contractor just for Royal? Is that
just
correct?
for Royal? Just for
Yes,
Royal.
just one school. Yep.
And you think he has the bandwidth and the skills, et cetera, to do that
No,
project?
he does, Chris. So he actually, so there's another large site work contractor in Fairfield from New Canaan, AMEC, who basically has stopped performing site work, and most of his team and a lot of his equipment has moved over to Grasso. And Grasso is working for me on two other projects. They have the equipment and they have the additional manpower from the AMEC team that came over. So I'm comfortable that they can perform the work.
Yeah, and aren't they currently working in Darien?
Yeah, I saw them working at the Norotan Heights train station.
Yeah, so I've also had a conversation with Ed Gentile about his sense of Grasso, and he would be, and he is supportive of moving forward with Grasso on Royal School. And he's his opinion is they've been doing good work for him, and he wants to keep them on doing the sidewalk paving work, most of what he's been doing for Ed. But he, I don't think Ed likes any contractor, but he's supportive of Grasso.
Right. Okay. And so then the trade. So looking at your summary, Laurel, what is the aggregate of 77,091,522? That is reflective of the bid results from early November plus the alternates that we've accepted, correct?
That is correct. Yes, that's correct.
And so for my benefit and hopefully for the benefit of the other folks on the call, before we get into everything below that first box on your summary, is the typical process from here that you guys would make a recommendation to accept the bids from all, was it 19 of the trade contractors, aggregating the 77,091 after discuss, then that would be ultimately up to the building committee to approve, and then subject to appropriation, those bids would be held until the end of January, and subject to appropriation, you would then enter into GMP contracts with each of those trades?
Well, I don't necessarily need you to act and accept on these particular trade packages. Tonight is just the first pass at showing you where we think we are overall.
No, I'm sorry, but ultimately we need to approve them, don't we? Like next week before.
I was thinking of rolling it into the GMP. In other words, preparing the actual GMP, this whole document, besides the cost summary, there's other documents involved. and present that whole document to you while the additional funding is getting approved. Present that whole
Okay.
document, and then once you approve that document, those contractors are what bases that document. So de facto, you are approving the trade contractors.
Yeah, you don't have to do a contractor by contractor approval.
No,
Right,
because
okay.
it's all
No, I
done.
didn't think so. But you become the contract party with the trades, and then
Correct.
we'd have a GM, and then the town has a
Correct.
GMP with ONGAP.
Correct.
Yeah, and under normal circumstances, we would have tried to accelerate the award of some of the trade contractors just to keep the project moving. But since nothing is going to happen until the additional appropriation is approved, and you're going to release everybody at once, you might as well just do it all together in the GMP.
So any questions or discussion points from the committee on the process part of it going forward, and on what Laurel's done to this point on the scope review? Any questions on that process, et cetera?
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I missed it. I looked through all my emails and attachments, but did you send out a revised summary sheet with after the bid reviews with the awarded bid contractors so we can go line by line? Did that get sent out?
I only sent out an overall GMP cost summary. I have all the backup. We just finished it like half an hour ago, the cost
Okay, no
summary.
problem.
So that's all that
yeah.
I had time to get out.
No, I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss it. And, I looked
Nope.
through all the attachments. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, no, if that's something that is that something that would be helpful for you?
Point so we can go. I want to be able to go through school by
Yes.
school, contractor by contractor. Just
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll have the cost summary, and then I'll have the Henley sheet, and then the Royal sheet, and the home sheet, so you can see how the numbers are feeding in. So everything will tie
right.
together.
Could you
and you'll see
also
which
make sure?
contractors we're carrying.
I'd also like to see who. You don't have to put every one of them, but like the top 2 or 3 bids per contract. So that we see, X contractor was this cost and what the second contractor was. Or,
Yeah, you'll have all the bid results as well. So
Right.
it goes Henley bid results, and then what the contract award summary is, which was just the low bidders. Then it'll go Home's bid results, Home contract award summary, Royal bid
Thank you.
results.
Yeah,
So you'll have all the information.
that'll give us an idea. If we looked at it once quickly, but I haven't studied it, like how on top of each other some of these bids were. So we have
Right.
a comfort level that the pricing came in where we think it should have.
Okay.
A couple quick questions. I'd love to know if it's possible if you could list with some of the bids who has withdrawn their bids, so we can have an understanding. Because I just would love to be able to understand as a part of this variance how much of the variance is due to the fact that some of the lowest bidders did remove their bids, if that's possible.
I can give you a summary for that. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
I can do that.
And then, okay, so that's construction cost. And then Laurel, on your sheet, you list general conditions, bid advertising, the CM contingency of 3%, which now is that I know that's in the contract, but is that a standard CM contingency?
It is.
It is standard, yes.
Bonds, the CM fee, and then then you have total GMP proposal cost of 88,627. And then you have soft costs, and you have date 11/16/23. You have 7,389,000. I guess the first question is, does that foot with the? I didn't get a chance in the time we had to check, but does that foot with the soft cost analysis that David and Kevin did and sent around earlier?
It's the one that David Martin sent out on December 5th. There was a revised estimate. It was 11/16/23. So I took the soft costs excluding the owner's contingency values off of his sheet, because then I recalculated the owner's contingency based on the construction cost.
Yeah, Chris, it matches where we are.
And that includes FF&E, which we'll talk about separately, correct?
That includes the FF&E estimates that Travis provided us for all of the new space, but does not include any FF&E for heavily renovated space.
And then, right, okay, because that came out recently. That came out just today from KG&D. And then the owner's contingency of 4.5, because we're going to be asked about this as part of the appropriation process. I mean, is that a market owner's contingency? And is it possible to get some kind of comparables or other data points?
That's directly from Ox Ridge, Chris. That
Right,
came
Chris.
right from.
And Chris, how we got to that at Ox Ridge was we started at 5%, which for new construction is a general rule of thumb for new construction. And when we were having some budget constraints there, we had locked that contingency at 4.5%, and that carried through the project. Generally, on an alteration and extension project, if you have the capability to increase that to at least 5%, we would highly recommend that.
And is that, again, because we're going to be asked, is that supportable by, it would be great to be able to say at the following projects that were alteration renovations, the owner's contingency was 5 or 4.5, and that's the recommendation of ONGAP, only because I think there may be some sensitivity to overly inflated contingencies. It'd be great if we could get some market data on that.
Yeah, Dave, when did you guys set the sort of 5 to 4.5% owner's contingency on Ox Ridge? Was that earlier in the process, or was that?
It was. Yeah, I want to say, Tom, that when we established some of the first conceptual estimates in the project, we had a discussion amongst the design team, ourselves, and the Ox Ridge Building Committee, and had agreed upon 5% as the starting point.
Okay, so you had a lot more uncertainty at that point. I mean, kind of where we're sitting here today, we're basically we almost effectively have our GMP for our hard construction costs, and so in theory, there shouldn't be any risk to the town for overages there. Is that correct?
Well, what you don't have right now is simply what is unknown and undocumented.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Tom,
So
the caveat is with a renovation like this, right? We don't know what's behind the walls yet, or
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. That's what's more concerning is with a new building. For the most part, you have the cards that you're going to play with, right? Dealt because you're creating it out of nothing.
And Dave Cravenzola, it also the owner's contingency also would not cover any change orders, right? That falls to the owner's contingency.
Wait, say that again, Dave.
Any change orders that would occur during the process do not get covered under the construction manager's contingency. They get covered under the owner's contingency.
Well, no, so changes, unforeseen conditions, owner request items, changes in scope would get funded from the owner's contingency. However, things that are, not bid out, say, if there's like coordination type things in the documents, if there's a roof block or a blocking detail, and say the blocking's drawn, and as we assign that to trades, if we thought we had awarded it to the drywall trade, but we actually never awarded it to the drywall or the roofing trade, it's a scope of work that was clearly delineated by the design team, but we failed to buy out as part of the bidding process. That would be funded.
And that's covered by your GMP, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, and
that's your risk.
So let me give you guys a little color. Ox Ridge had produced a report. It's a little stale dated, but they had produced a report on the contingencies and utilization thereof. And in that report, they provided where they estimated they would be at the end of the project. So for the construction manager's contingency, they projected that it was projected when the report was done that they would use about 52% of the construction manager's contingency, and of the owner's contingency, they were projecting that they would use 36.5% of that. So, and that's using the 4.5% owner's contingency that we've talked about. Now, I think I personally would expect in a renovation project we would use a higher percentage of the owner's contingency. but I don't know if we need to go to the 5% or not, but that's up for discussion.
Better to have it now and not be able to cover something.
I would sure hate to go through another appropriation request yet again.
I don't know that
We're talking
we
4.5 to 5% on a renovation with unknowns and some of the stuff I know about homes. I'd rather have it in hand if I'm paying the change orders out of our pocket, then we need to keep it at 5%.
So I'm sorry, we need to take what's listed as the owner's contingency at 4.5% and now up it to 5%?
I think that's the suggestion.
Okay, do we have those numbers?
I can get those numbers.
That would be great.
Just bear in mind that based off the summary sheet that Laurel just distributed, the ask is going to be $18.4 million higher than currently appropriated.
Is that with the 4.5 or the 5%, Dave?
That's with the 4.5 or 22.4% higher than what's currently appropriated.
What does 4.5 to 5% take us?
I'm calculating it right now. I've got my spreadsheet open. I just need a minute. Sorry.
Dave Martin, you preempted my next question, which was, could somebody back of the envelope calculate what Laurel's total, how much of an addition?
My new total with 5%, total, all three schools, 101, 125, 697.
Versus
100,
646.
It's half a million more.
So $18.5 million, yeah. Or
it's $500,000 total to go from 4.5 to 5%.
Of contingency, yeah, that we may or may not spend.
That's the other key. Rather have
Yeah, the
more
other thing
contingency.
I would like to just add also that at the Oxbridge project, the construction took care of all the low voltage, the teledata and security, whereas on these projects, that's not really in our scope of work. So there's more work on the owner's side. So that is another reason probably to keep it a little higher, just in case.
Correct. Plus, you can't compare Oxbridge and these projects. They're apples and oranges.
Right. What happens to money if it's not spent?
We all throw a big party and go camping.
No.
Well, I mean, I'll say, Jameson, I'll start with. I'll start with the CM contingency. 100% of the unused funds get returned to the project, and then the project contingency gets returned to the town.
Okay.
The big thing is the money goes back. So that's why you don't want to ask for a second. You don't want to ask a second time if we go over. So you want the money now to cover whatever unknowns. Yeah, whatever unknowns were out there that we haven't covered. And when we start, like I'm just thinking Royal, when I get into that double height thing with the library and all that stuff out there, there's going to be something. And Eric, I'm happy for you to weigh in as an architect who's been through this a million times.
At this point in the process with a renovation, we would always carry 5% at least going in, and with hopefully the expectation that we don't spend it all and we can return it back to the taxpayers. But as you say, it's better to ask for it now, and then if we don't need it, return it, than to have to go back later. It's renovations are challenging projects. They're different than new construction. At Ox Ridge, the challenge was really getting out of the ground and steel and concrete, and after that, you don't have anything major. In this case, you're opening up walls, and we didn't open up every wall, so we're not sure exactly what's going to be behind them, and there's going to be cases where you're going to have to spend a little bit of money to address conditions that were unforeseen.
Are we 100%? We have no asbestos in anywhere when we open a wall, that there's no mastic anywhere, that nothing's hot, that I don't have to abate anything. I don't know that. I assume it. But Kevin, even Kevin probably has some fears about when we start opening stuff up, right?
Well, we are doing abatement as part of this project.
Right, I know, but there could be more than you even anticipate once you get into stuff.
I mean, Hygienics has been working in the district for a while now, right, Kevin?
Yeah, they know the ins and outs of the buildings, and I've got a deal of confidence. But I think to Paul's point, when you start really getting into the weeds, you don't know what you're going to encounter. And I definitely echo the sentiment. It's better to have it now than need it later.
So yeah, so again, I totally hear everybody's point on 5 being a good conservative best practices number. If it's at all possible for ONG or KG&D to give us some examples other than just Ox Ridge, it would just, again, it just helps us build the case when we're asked, gee, is this industry standard for this kind of work?
It totally is industry standard. I mean, all of our projects, for the most part, start out with 5% owner's contingency.
Okay.
That is very typical.
Okay.
We would agree with that as well. I'm sure we
Okay.
can find some examples of
Yeah.
carrying 5% and ultimately what did we end up spending. I think that's what you're kind of asking.
Yeah. I think that's right.
And I would say for us, they all start at 5, and the ones that, like in the case of Ox Ridge, that end up less than that, it's because of trying to manage some sort of budget risk when you're that close, where you could be within the appropriation, but you need a little more wiggle room, is when we see that adjusted down some fractions of a percent.
Okay. So just to reiterate, so Dave Martin, you, like I said, you preempted the question I was going to have, and thank you very much for doing that, which was you did the calculation at the basically $101 million aggregate, that the net result of that is asking for an additional appropriation over and above what was appropriated in November of 2022 of 18.4 million, which is a 22.4%. I'm
Chris,
sorry.
Chris, that was on
It's a little more than
4.5%.
18.4. You're right. You're right. I'm
Chris,
sorry.
yeah.
That number was at the 4.5%
Yep, got it.
contingency.
You're right.
At the 5% contingency, that increase over the current appropriation is going to be 18,875,567.
So roughly 18.9.
Yeah,
Right.
because the currently appropriated is $82,250,000.
I'm sorry. Could you give that number again? 82.
250,000.
Okay. And so the percentage is not 22.4. It's something higher than that.
22.95%. So call it 23%.
Okay. Which coincidentally is, if you look at the other sheet that Dave Cravenzola had sent around before our meeting, is coincidentally the percentage variance in the bids between November and the original budget. And maybe we can turn to that sheet for a second.
Sure. Why don't we do
because
that?
that has answers to
The questions that Dave Martin had sent over.
Yeah, so Dave Martin, I think, and again, preparing for the presentations to support the additional appropriations request. Dave asked, and we wanted to understand, Dave Martin asked, and we wanted to understand what we thought contributed to what we're now calling an 18.9%, 22.9%, 23% round numbers increase from where we were in our appropriation a little over a year ago. And so, Dave Cravenzola, I'll turn that over to you. You answered it at the bottom as to what your team thinks the basis for that variance is.
Yep. So I want to start by, when we were looking at Laurel sheet, we're looking a lot of total project costs, and a lot of our assessment when we talk about overages, we've been talking about the trades because they're so, as you can see in the correlation that Chris made, it's related to the bidding that came in, right? So the numbers that you see on the summary we put together, they're the trade costs that's bid. So we're looking at everything is relative to that $77,091,522, Chris, that you honed in on as the total for all three schools for the trade cost. It's relative to that. So a couple things just for starting is at the top, we just want to take a look back on how we got here estimate wise. So we had assembled what the trade budget was after that November appropriation, being considerate of including the roofs and the Hoyt property. We then looked at that. We looked at then our design development estimate, which was the one that preceded the last estimate we did, and that was in December of 2022. And that one, keep in mind, like the schematic design estimate, not only did we do an estimate, but KG&D's independent estimator, NASCO, did an estimate at both schematic and design development. And our estimates at design development were within a couple of % of one another. I think our estimate was slightly higher than NASCO's, but we were in direct alignment there. Then when we went from the DD estimate to the CD estimate is when the total jumped up about another $800,000. We then did a couple other interim assessments on lines 3, 4, 5, 6. That was just we're trying to process some numbers, but I want to get down to the bottom. There is 8, 9, and 10. The budget backing into those appropriations that were voted on last year. We had $62,696,900 in trade cost. That is in comparison to the $77,091,522 for the bids, which include all of the alternates that the committee is hoping to accept. So how that comes out as $4.3 million at Hinley, 3.3 at Royal, and 6.6 at Holmes, for a total of $14.39 million, which is 22.96%. So that's our starting point of assessing where the bids are versus the budget that we had put together, the estimate we had put together. Mm-hmm. So the first step of that then is to say, okay, where were we where was our last estimate relative to the budget? And when we had our last construction documents estimate before we bid, those estimates showed that we were $3.1 million over budget. So with that
Dave, do you recall of that 3.1 million, what were the driving factors to get to that 3.1?
A lot of it was scope that was in the construction document set that was not in the design development. So remember, that was a lot of time when some of those things came in, like when the security, some of those vestibules entered the project. I think maybe Travis and Eric could probably opine on some more specifics, but that's where, there were some details added and some scope that came in at that point of the project.
Dave, that's a comparison to the appropriation budget, not the DD budget. Right. So that $3.1 million is really between the appropriation budget and the.
Correct. Correct. The overall increase from the DD to the CD was about $800,000 net across the three schools. So that $3.1 million is approximately 5% of the 23% overage. Then we have the alternates at $452,000 is another 0.75% of that overage. What we then have is the estimate that we had done included escalation for 2 months at that time. It was a May estimate escalating to construction, which was supposed to be starting in July of 2023. What we then did was, in moving the project from July of 23 to June of 24, we incurred escalation in that 11 months. And while in our estimates we were showing about 7.3%, we know that not all of that escalation came through, because as we were scoping trades, there were some trades, there were some vendors that Ferguson was telling us that they held their pricing from one bid to the next. But we do know that functions like labor, which at its own is about 3.5%, was certainly considered in all the bids that came. So we took a blended escalation of, it was 4.8% per year, which at 11 months equates to 4.68%. No, I'm sorry, it's 4.46 is the percent of escalation, which equates to approximately $2.9 million. That's another 4.68% of the overage. That then leaves us with about 12.6% of the other stuff. And I would say that, some of the things that we were discussing is generally when we're bidding projects, they don't come in on the number. And what we've been finding is that there's been a swing of about 4.5% to 5% under budget to 4.5% to 5% over budget. So there's about another 4 to 5% of that 12 that we can account for simply the swings that we naturally get in the bidding market that generally can be absorbed by the project as they move forward. So then we're down to that 8% that we believe is related to what I will globalize as market conditions, or in the bidding market of what drove us. And I know we've talked at length about this. Tom, I don't know if you want to.
Well, Dave, we did a pretty extensive survey of the subcontractors before we went out to rebid, relative to why they weren't bidding or why the previous people did not bid, and while we were trying to encourage them to do the rebid, and it really is a mix of issues, right? It's really hard, Chris, to try to put a specific number on a specific issue, but there was a clear indications from the subs on a number of issues. One was the amount of work that was really being let upstate as opposed to the Fairfield County area, which was more attractive to the people. There's not a lot of DAS certified subs that are local in the Fairfield County area. And the majority of the subs that do bid these school projects are from the middle part of the state. And because of the increased workload, I think the subs were able to kind of pick what work they wanted to bid and what was more attractive to them. And we also saw, because of the amount of work, there's really a labor issue, a shortage of skilled trades, and those trades would kind of control how the subcontractor ownership would pursue work when they didn't want to drive the hour and a half to get to lower Fairfield County, as opposed to try to work on a closer to home project. Really hard to put a specific percentage. I know Dave asked for break it up a little bit more, but
yeah, we recognize that's kind of a finger in the wind analysis, right? That makes sense. That's helpful. Thank you for being thoughtful.
And by the way, Dave, Chris, I mentioned to you, and there's somebody on the committee who's also on the Stanford Museum and Nature Center committee, but these are the same type of percentages in terms of the over budget that we saw, and the same type of percentage of participation we saw in that project also.
I'm going to open that up for comment, questions, reactions from the committee before we move on to possibly a next topic.
Would it be possible to tease out a little bit the variance between budget and the CDE estimate? You mentioned scope, but I'm curious to know how much of the $3 million difference are the scope items, and how much of it are something else.
Well, Dave, when we did the appropriation budget, right, that was more of a kind of a square foot basis at the time. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, but when for the original grant application, we took one of the finalists who interviewed for the AE services, and we took their plans, and from there we essentially came up with 3 buckets of money. We came up with addition and a square foot cost, light alteration, and moderate alteration, and we basically came up with approximate percentages that we thought each of those would fall into, and that's how we had come up with the original budgets or estimates that became part of the initial grant application.
So,
Okay,
Dave,
but it should be fairly easy to say from that initial budget estimate, the scope changed by these 5 following factors, and we think those 5 following factors could represent roughly X dollars. Isn't that easy to do?
Well, I mean,
we weren't
I
even.
know
We're not
one
even
that took in
comparing.
mind early on is that Holmes, from day one, Holmes had a much larger addition than was ever contemplated when we went for the initial grant application. That was, I remember that was one that from the get-go, Holmes was always over from our very first estimate.
Well, as you can probably tell, I'm attempting to quantify any of it that we can, because we're about to go to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance and ask them for almost 19 million additional dollars. And I'm going to have a hard time explaining a 23% jump in the price from the estimate that we previously had.
Well, that's that 23% is over the appropriation budget, not the last estimate that we had. Maybe we can.
So the $3 million.
It's kind of both, right? I mean, they happen to coincidentally be the same percentage, right? I think what Dave was saying is that it's what Dave Crevenzola said is that the 23% is the variance between the bids that we got in November and the original budget. Right.
Right. So the difference between the original budget and the CDE represents a percentage of that. And if we can explain what that was, wouldn't that be helpful?
Yeah, I thought we did that when we were presenting our construction documents estimates. I could have swore we had the soils pollution. I know we had the security. I think I'd have to go search through my records, but I'm pretty sure we had a little matrix that was explaining why we had that, even that 3 million overage before we went out to bid. Because remember, we were over budget, and
right.
The decision was made.
David, we'll do that for you. We'll dig out.
Yeah, if you can go back and recreate that, Laurel, that would be very helpful.
And actually, I remember too. I think Eric and Travis, remember early on, I want to say we had generated some slides to talk about some of those cost drivers as well. I don't know if you guys recall that.
I just remember an Excel spreadsheet that I think Eric even started. I just remember that, going through the exercise.
Yeah, I'm happy to work with you, Laurel and Dave, to put together something that makes Dave Martin a little bit more comfortable.
It's not Dave. It's we have to go ask the town now for $20 million more money. Yeah, no, I want to express, I think, to everybody from O&J and KG&D, we need to really explain in detail. When we go back, we have to go back to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and to the RTM and explain to hundreds of people and ask for their approval. And so we're looking for that detail for that reason.
Yeah, I guess I'm just sweating a little bit because I know the type of questioning and level of detail that we get on other projects in town. And the folks that sit on the Board of Finance are all highly educated, very seasoned financial people. And, the more in-depth detail I have, the better chance we can get it approved, because this is going to be hard.
And just in so discussing all this, there's definitely that $3 million of work is sort of expansion of scope, or how we had to do things to make sure that everybody was really thrilled with the project that we're doing. But the vast majority of this was really, unfortunately to say, an unforeseen condition where the bidding climate was just significantly different than what the expectation was 6 months earlier when those bids were, or when the estimates were put together.
Right.
And that's where the design and CM team is having a tough time sort of explaining this, is that it was really a timing thing when we went out to bid, as well as just a market thing at that time that nobody expected, nobody foresaw 6 months before when those design, development, and construction document estimates
Yeah,
were
I
put
think
together.
we understand. I think we understand that. I think what maybe saying what it a little bit differently is we recognize that there's a fairly large category of non-quantifiable factors, right? So therefore, to the extent that we can get some detail around the actually quantifiable factors, that makes our job that much easier, right? Because we already know that there's $7.9 million of what we'll loosely call unquantifiable. So we'd like to be able to have we'd like to be able to explain as much as we can those items that are quantifiable. Like the added alternates, that's pretty easy. We have a list of them, right? Escalation and inflation, we can back that up. It would just be very helpful to have a little bit more precision on that 3.1.
For every cost escalation, from every change, we should have a document that explains what the scope changes were. That should be at everyone's fingertips. So if we went from X to 3 million, there should be line items in a document that clearly says this is what it was. I'm a little baffled we don't have it. That's what we're doing here. We're capturing costs, we're capturing scope changes, we're putting a project together. So that's construction 101 stuff.
No, thank you, Paul. I think Dave Martin and Travis are prepared to talk about some more detail behind the soft costs and the FF&E numbers. Do people want to do that? Those numbers are, largely
Chris.
embedded.
Chris, before we move on, I just have one question on the last chart.
Yeah.
On the last chart, I appreciate the difference between the original appropriation and this current bid. What's the bottom line between our previous bid and this bid?
It's a reduction in cost. It went down by 1,666,737, which was a
2%.
savings of 2.12%.
Thank you very much.
And Jill, that's found on line 7 of that sheet.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
So what I was saying was embedded in Laurel's GMP summary is total soft costs of roughly 7.4 million. And I noted at the very beginning of the meeting that David and Travis and Sue and Kevin Minrett have been working very, very hard on the detail behind that number. And if folks would like, they're prepared to go through that, just to let folks know how that was arrived at and how that was different than original estimates. I mean, hearing no objection, I guess, why don't we start? Do you want to start with FF&E? I'll leave it to you, Dave and Travis, how you want to present on that.
Yeah, we can look at I know I just shot that summary over because I was modifying it based on the most recent request, but
Right.
we can go through kind of how we arrived at that number and walk through the what's included in that scope of work from a kind of broad general point of view. I don't think there's a need to go line by line through the furniture, but we can talk about the process and how we arrived at it.
Sure. And I think
so
that, and I just as a caveat before you start, I think
yeah,
that the number that's in Laurel's summary is likely also to go up because we had talked about potentially increasing the scope of the furniture buy, which I think you'll talk about in your summary, right?
Right, because the initial number that we worked on with the principals and based on the Ox Ridge numbers was just for what we're calling in the documents that I just sent the base scope of work, which is for the new addition spaces and the GLCs. We were not including new furniture in the reworked kind of heavy renovation or the lightly renovated or the existing condition spaces within the buildings. Those were going to be furniture that's reused from the school. So then we were asked, well, if we're touching and resizing some of those classrooms, the rooms that get a heavy renovation, what does that number look like if we then put new furniture into those spaces? So that's the newest package that went out today that includes numbers for those more heavily renovated spaces in addition to the new addition spaces. Maybe a little history here on where we started. I think back with the appropriation, I think your original placeholder for furniture was a very low $70,000 per building. All right, and then when we came in, we said, well, we need to at least get that up to 200 per building, and from there, and that's for more I don't want to say basic, but like a well furnished classroom, but still keeping it basic. I think per Ox Ridge and the needs from the principals, these are well furnished and heavily furnished classrooms to suit your needs. So when we came back, that 200,000 per building, that was a placeholder at the time. Then we came back and did a more extensive outline based on the Ox Ridge numbers that we had, which were from a couple of years ago. We applied a 20% markup to those as a placeholder while we were waiting for an actual vendor to come back and give us the price. And then we did get the pricing back from the vendor. This was the vendor, Robert Lord, who did, I gave one of the prices for Ox Ridge. They were one of the 5 vendors, and they were kind of the most experienced vendor in the state. There were a couple of vendors we were told not to deal with, based on Kevin's experience and based on Sue's experience. So we reached out to Lord, and they came back with an all-in budget price for us. So that's what all those documents that I sent out represent. So I don't know what we want to look at specifically, but I can share my screen if I get permission to.
You should be able to. Please let me know if you're not.
Okay. Let's see. Here we go. So I should say that Sue made a first pass. For all those that don't know, Sue Davidson is our head of interior design, and she's the specialist in the furniture department. So she did a first pass, and let me show. This is the furniture summary. But before I even get there, she did a first pass based on the Ox Ridge scope, because we were told to use that as a base model. And this then we went through and listed all the individual pieces per room in the new addition and GLC scope of work. We then took that and we met with the 3 principals, and then we walked through each room, each item, and we made either deletions, revisions, or additions to that scope. So as we walk through here, we have our classrooms, we have our quantity of individual items, we have the Ox Ridge reference tag of if the item was used in Ox Ridge or not. If it wasn't, there's an added note here. If it was revised for the spec based on the specific school and district requirements, then there's a revised number. Then we show the original Ox Ridge cost. Then we show the unit cost that's current. These are numbers provided us by the vendor. Then we show that large delta between the two, which shocked even us, but the numbers did shoot up a bit. There were some revisions in the scope, and what are some of the other factors? And that's a budget number. I'd have to go into more detail with those unit costs that we got from Ox Ridge. I'm not sure if they're exactly apples to apples, if those were all in complete budget numbers, but the numbers we got from the vendor are budget numbers. They include the vendor, kind of handling the process on site with the furniture. They include escalation, and freight is tallied up further down on here. So those are more budget numbers than line item numbers. And I should say these are all based on state contract prices. So they take the state contract price, which is a pre-agreed to price, and then they add whatever those markups that I just mentioned, meaning that these don't have to go out to bid because they've already been pre-agreed on with the state. So then we get the two totals. We broke out the total. This is per the kind of baseline scope from Ox Ridge, and then we gave added scope that were pieces of furniture that were added based on our conversations with the principals, and then some comments and then more detail. And so we did that for each school. Then based on the comments, from earlier this week, we were asked what's involved if we add the heavily renovated spaces. So we didn't have time to, obviously, it's kind of an added scope item to go into those spaces and do this work, but we quickly put together, just based on a per room quantity, whether we had that room already from the work we had just did, or we pulled it from the Ox Ridge and we applied the average delta that we were seeing from the current vendor's budget pricing from the Ox Ridge numbers. So that's what the second part of these tabs are for each school for the renovated items, for the added scope items. And so that gives you your new total. Again, everything also has the 10% freight that was added on. That's coming from the vendor. And then it references specifically the Ox Ridge rooms that we base that number off of. So that's how we get to the summary item. We have the base scope that includes the kind of the baseline pieces of furniture and any added pieces of furniture that the district wanted. Then we have the added scope that includes those more heavily renovated spaces, and then we have the total. And that's how we arrived at these numbers. In the package too, just so you know, I've also included plans. We highlighted so it's crystal clear on which rooms are getting new furniture. Green was the original kind of base scope items for that 1.06 number, and then the blue is the added scope for the more renovated spaces. And so we have this for each building. The rooms in white are lightly renovated, again, not currently getting new furniture, not included in that number, and the gray are existing with little to no work that are not getting any new furniture. So the expectations there would they be reusing furniture. So that exists for each building. So I don't know if we want to go into any detail there. Yep.
Yeah, I know. I'll open it up for questions and comments in a second, but the added scope, I guess we would need to consider, discuss, and ultimately decide whether we're going to add that additional $867,000 into our appropriation request. Correct, Jill, David?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah. I think the first question, Travis, is to understand the base scope, because there are some differences, right? We put 200,000 as a placeholder, and it looks like at Henley we're pretty close, but at the other two schools we're not. Can you walk us through what you think at a high level the delta is in those two schools?
Yeah. So the reason the scope varies between the schools is, first of all, Royal's high because it has twice as many new classrooms. There's 8 classrooms in Royal. So right there, that's a reason for that change. Hindley is the lowest because it actually has the least number of regular classrooms. It's more the special. We had the art, the music, the the world language, and the GLC. So it has a little less new scope than the other buildings from a strict, new construction point of view. And then homes is kind of in the middle there. You'll also see it reflected too in the added scope. It reflects the scope of work that we're doing, because homes has the least added scope is because we're doing the smallest amount of heavy renovation work to resize rooms, because they were already sized appropriately at homes. So therefore, we're not applying a new furniture number to that. And you can see how roles are reversed between Hindley and Royal is because more of those classrooms are in the new construction than existing. That's why this number is weighted more on the base scope, versus Hindley. More of those rooms are in that kind of heavy renovation, resizing of spaces in the existing building. So that's why that number is more weighted to the added scope. Why the difference between the 200,000? Again, that was a placeholder early on, and that was not based on the level of furniture that was provided in the Ox Ridge model, because we were not aware of that information at the time. So that was more based on maybe what we would like to see for a standard classroom fit out that we would utilize.
Kevin, can you provide any color there on what Travis is saying vis-a-vis matching Ox Ridge?
Sure. The one thing, the meeting with the principals went really well. It was heavily thought out. The interim principal at Ox Ridge, who had just received all the Ox Ridge furniture, really shed some light on the items that they did not like, that wouldn't work, that shouldn't be considered, and that's where a lot of these numbers were able to be fleshed out.
Right. There, small. There's items kind of on both ends of the spectrums. There's some items that Sue would argue is probably a little on the cheaper end that was used at Ox Ridge. So we are speccing a better piece that'll get you longevity. So you're not replacing this piece after a couple years, 5 years. And then there's other ends of the spectrum where, there's definitely items in there that are a bit high that we can definitely find substitutions for. And that would be part of the process that we would work on as we move forward. But this kind of averages that out and gives us a number now, because we don't have time to go through again each item on that end. And I should say, we did that thorough process already, and then there's just a little more tweaking. So that number's not going to move drastically, but there's some tweaks that we can do going forward.
How is the existing furniture going to compare to the new furniture? Will this lead parents to be vocal about complaining?
Might be a better question for Kevin, but that's always the. Yes, there are going to be rooms with new furniture, and there's going to be rooms with old furniture. I don't know the level of the old furniture, Kevin, but there is a difference.
Yeah, the old furniture is very sturdy. It's quite durable. Anytime, we've been clear from the beginning that this is a renovation project, and it is not a brand new ground up construction. That decisions of this nature have to be made. So I think as long as the messaging is still consistent, hopefully that'll mitigate some of the complaints.
Yeah, good point. I mean, there's no difference in the fact that there's going to be rooms that are renovated and rooms that are not touched, and you'll have that difference there in addition to the furniture.
It's an alteration,
right?
Not a renovation.
Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, that's a distinction in Connecticut. Yes.
That will be the same. That will be the same feeling that some of the teachers will have too. The ones who aren't touched, classrooms aren't touched, and it won't feel like it's different to them. But that's where we are. I mean, that's the nature of the project a little bit. And clearly, the more rooms we can look like and feel like it's maybe the better in some ways. But it is what it is. Certainly, we can do the large areas and the areas that we're actually touching now. That's going to be helpful.
Do we know these are all different rooms and different spaces, but where are we on the furniture replacement cycle anyway for these spaces?
So I don't know if we necessarily have a furniture replacement cycle for the elementary schools per se. We're starting to look at the high school right now because of the age and the deterioration of that furniture. But I'm sure that the next step on the capital plan will take a look at some of these spaces that aren't receiving new furniture.
What number is represented on the GMP? I assume this is included on the GMP, correct?
None of these numbers are included in GMP. I have a different. Well, no, I guess the Henley one is correct. 256, 532. The original ones, the homes, I had 308, 341, and in Royal, I had 487, 419.
Okay. The reason I ask is if we're going with the GMP to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, and then we're talking about contingency and all of that, that may already, if we start adding scope later, that may already start taking away from that contingency.
Yeah, no, I don't think we should do that. I think we should decide as a group. And Jill, I'll ask you to weigh in on process and the best way to authorize this. But the added scope, if we think the added scope is appropriate for the project, then the added scope should be what's reflected in the appropriation request, which will be, yet another increase over the 18.9 million we talked about a little bit earlier. I don't think we should kick that down the field thinking that, gee, we might want to do the added scope and therefore we'll pay for it out of contingency. I don't think that's a good approach. And obviously that's one person's view, but
yeah, I agree.
But Jill, is that something that's a formal
bringing that up.
approval, or is that something that we just, we decide as a group that that's going to be part of the appropriation request? Yeah,
It's going to add about another 110,000 to the overall value. To just the added. Never mind.
Why isn't it going to add 867,000?
Because there's 5% owner's contingency. Plus, I didn't count where I don't necessarily have the base scope reflected. So you got to take the 867 times at 1.5, right? Because you got owner's contingency.
Yeah. No, I got it.
Laura, I'm a little confused here, Laura, because the FF&E is in the owner's soft costs, and in the owner's soft cost numbers that you showed on your summary sheet, those came directly from my sheet, and they reflect the base scope from Travis's spreadsheet. So I'm a little confused why we think there's different numbers, because whatever number is in for FF&E should be in the soft cost component, and it should equal what's on Travis's sheet, because that's what I use.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got something that was given to me on December 5th, so I have different numbers, but they're just slightly different, the base scope numbers. Henley matches exactly, but Holmes, I have 308, 341, and Royal, I have 487, 419.
But we're not using those numbers because the FF&E is embedded in the soft cost components, and in the soft cost component, the line item that you put there for each of the schools, you took that from my spreadsheets. On my spreadsheets, it includes the numbers that Travis has. So I'm not sure what you're referencing there, but the numbers that we have in currently are the base scope that Travis has on his sheet in column B.
Okay.
Dave, I think when we're done with this discussion, I think what we just want to make sure we were happy to report and include whatever number you want. So it's just make sure that we're on the same page with what number it is you want us to plug into that overall. So
yeah.
I think in the meantime, I'm the one that asked the question about what the implications would be for furnishing the heavily renovated spaces, but I don't think we're in a position to add scope. I don't think we want to impact our contingency. I think we have been very careful about defining scope and sticking to it. And I think, paying for additional contingency fees on top of this FF&E, which can be replaced as part of a capital replacement cycle, probably doesn't make sense. So I think we probably just need to stick to the original plan.
The original base scope and not the added scope?
Yes.
may I suggest that we've increased contingency from 4.5% to 5%. That 5% contingency in our experience, first of all, it's obviously used for unforeseen conditions. We often see that 2 or 3% of that contingency is used by the owner for additional things that the owner wants on a project. After a certain point in the project, when we know that there's no more unforeseen conditions, you can either choose to return that money to the taxpayers, or you can use that money for additional scope items, for example, the additional furniture, if you so choose.
I think I appreciate that, Eric, and I thank you for raising the point. I think we'll have to be very careful. I think as a town, we're looking very carefully at a lot of different line items, including town and school budgets, this building project, and the Great Island project. So my guess is we probably will need to be very careful about all contingency dollars. And I think the committee should be aware and probably committed to that.
But are we doing that at the risk of downgrading the project when this is our opportunity to ask for the dollars? Or is it more than that? Is it because it's a change in scope that it's more than just asking for more dollars? I'm just asking.
I think generally furniture, in terms of what we were replacing, was somewhat ill-defined. There was just a base number put in there on the assumption that we would need some furniture. We drew a line somewhere, and we drew that line at new spaces because it was pretty close to the original. It was closer to the original number than anything else. At this stage, I think that, again, if we can replace the furniture as part of a replacement cycle and not pay, not add contingency dollars on it or anything like that, and if we have that planned in the relatively near future and what is there is in good shape, which I believe I understood Kevin to say, that's probably wise. But I'm willing to hear from other committee members.
Anybody else have a view on that?
Let me say that another way. I'd like to hear from other committee members.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I see both sides of it. The added scope, now's the opportunity to ask for the money to do that. But to what you're saying also, Jill, is you're adding contingency dollars to the project, which is just more on top of it. Dave Martin was already talking about going in front of Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and having to show very specifically why we're asking for more money. And everything up to this point has been asking for more money for scope that was already existing throughout the project. Now, at the very end of it, we're adding scope that could be spent differently at a different time. So I don't know. I'm probably more of the mindset of staying with the base scope and staying with those numbers that we had originally and saving different options.
I think you make a very valid point, Jamison. I think that's well said. Thank you.
I would agree. I think at some point near or farther down the line, if the Board of Education possibly could put in their budget, Jill, I don't mean to overreach. I'm speaking now to the chair of the Board of Education. But at some point, if there, would be a furniture renovation budget that would be presented, I think at this point, adding the scope, given the change in numbers, I would agree that we would probably prefer to stick to the base scope at this point.
Okay. That sounds like a consensus to me, unless others have a view.
I'm assuming that decision. Well, is that decision to be made tonight? Because I can certainly see both sides of this, and it might be that we flag to the respective the Board of Education would flag to the respective committees of that this type of thing would be forthcoming in the future to complete that sort of project and bring it up to speed. It'd be nice to have it up to speed with, but that was never always the case. But it certainly would be nice to replace it and have it look as new as we can. The added scope I could see. To be honest with you, I'd like to sort of like talk each of those through again, if that was the case, before making a comment one way or the other. But I can certainly see the case for not adding it, to be honest with you, for some of these spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have to make a definitive decision. We have to make a definitive decision certainly by next Wednesday when we have a hard approval over how much we're going to ask for. So.
Well, I would like the opportunity to review the detail to that again, to be honest with you, just to the scope,
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind, with my staff.
Sure.
Yeah, so to confirm the total scope, base plus added, this is effectively to mimic sort of the quality and consistency of what was done at Oxridge. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Keeping in mind that you still don't have all existing kind of no workspaces and light reno spaces. So it's still not a full. This number doesn't get you a full building full of new furniture, but the new furniture that you are getting is at the level of Oxridge for those specific spaces.
So Alan and Kevin, when you look at it, I would ask you guys to look through the lens of, it may be that the better thing to do is to stay the course and do a large scale replacement in all of the existing spaces, which would include the heavily renovated and the non-renovated classrooms. So if you guys could look at it that way as well, but just help us understand.
Sure.
And Kevin and Alan would be helpful. Go through those plans that I highlighted, those rooms, and just make sure that we're all on the same page.
Fine.
Because, I mean, one of the things is, if I'll just speak out, like if one of these numbers is for a space that we're spending money, that may not be the room that I would, like, to be honest with you, that I would encourage us to spend the money on for the furniture. Right. We make it a bigger bang to the buck, and on a regular education classroom that's not being touched. But anyway, that's the type of discussion I'd like to have with the staff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dave Martin, up to you as to whether you want to go into any more detail on the balance of the soft costs. I mean, they sort of are what they are at this point in the meeting.
I'm happy to go into as much detail as anyone would want. I could also just give a high-level, very quick summary of the methodology we use so people can understand how that worked out.
Why don't we start there? I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Basically, what we did was we took the soft cost estimates that were from the May 23rd document that O&G had provided us. And then we got Jen Charneski to produce a report that showed all payments that have been made on this project for each school by vendor, by account, the way the town had applied them. And so Kevin and I then reviewed each of those line items and looked for places where we thought that the numbers were incorrect. And so, for example, the easiest one would be is if you guys had the sheet open on the environmental consultant line, we had already spent more than was budgeted. So we obviously raised that up and to the amounts that we had spent, plus any amounts that we thought we would yet be spending going forward. If you look at in total, the total of the soft cost items for Hindley represented $189,000 increase, of which the bulk of that were one from a line item that we had to add, which is testing, inspections, and special inspections, because that number had been budgeted extremely low. And Kevin, do you want to just mention what you have done with TestCon and what they're going to cover for us during the construction process?
Sure. So last May, we had went out to bid on a number of these soft cost projects, not just the special inspections, but other items as well, whether it's data and technology or security. So we had a RFP process where TestCon came in as the low bidder. We have their pricing reflected here. And additionally, any vendor that we did receive quotes through that type of process back in May, I've reached out to them once this project was put on pause and verified that they would be willing to hold their pricing going forward. The commissioning agent is another example. They're holding their pricing for when we're ready to start the project.
And then there were a couple other things like the rent for the portables. We had to, by extending the project start date, we had to extend that. So we looked at the monthly rent and added another 6 months onto it to get us to when we expect the start date to be. And then for relocating the playground, for example, at Henley, we relocated the playground to allow for the construction process now, but the playground needs to be put back. And that specific playground is going to be actually expanded a little bit in size because there's some of the equipment, the old equipment from Ox Ridge is going to be added to the existing playground at Henley. So it's items like that that constitute the bulk of the changes there, along with the increased FF&E cost. The big difference in the total owner's cost sheet, if you will, is really the change in the owner's contingency, which is driven by the rise in the construction costs and the application of the in my estimate the 4.5%, but what I'm hearing is we're going to go with the 5% number. So the application of the 5% number there, which was what drove the costs.
Any questions, thoughts on that from the committee? Thank you, David and Kevin. Thank you again for diving into that so deeply. Really appreciate that. Unless there's anything else on FF&E and soft costs, kind of at the point where, going back a little bit to the beginning of the call in terms of process, it's going to be up to us. We've now got, what I think is a lot more clarity on what our total costs for this project are going to be. The hard costs, the construction costs, the various fees, which we've all known all along, the impact on the soft costs, the contingencies, the FF&E, et cetera, et cetera. We've got a lot more clarity on how much that's going to be and net, how much more money we are going to have to ask the town to appropriate. Using Dave Martin's numbers, that's going to be roughly $19 million, which is roughly a 23% increase of what was appropriated last November. And I think we have a lot more clarity on that as a result of the hard work of everybody that's on this meeting. But let's just take a breath for a second. Do we, is everybody on board with, and the timeline for that? Sorry, let me finish my thought. The timeline for that would be basically approving going forward with that appropriation request at next Wednesday's meeting, and then doing a presentation requesting that increased appropriation on Monday the 18th to the Board of Selectmen and Tuesday the 19th to the Board of Finance, which would then roll into presentations, assuming they approve, presentations to the rules and finance and education committees of the RTM, and ultimately to the full RTM later, kind of third week in January, for the RTM to vote on. So that's kind of the timeline, and that's the steps in the process. And I guess I would just put it out there for comment or conversation amongst the committee members. Is everybody on board with that? Right? Is everybody on board with proceeding on that basis for that amount? So we keep going, basically.
I think related to that, Chris, would be, is there any other due diligence that people are looking for in preparation for next week?
Nothing from me.
Do folks feel, I mean, just another way of asking the same question, do folks feel like they've got enough context and enough backup and enough background and enough explanation of how we arrived where we are, and that they're satisfied as a committee that what we're going to be asking for and hopefully getting approved is going to deliver the product that we want, and that is going to be expected from our towns, our neighbors, and that we don't want to rethink any aspect of this. I mean, we've got a mandate to deliver, the ed spec scope, and people have worked really, really hard to come up with a design that I think folks are happy with. But again, this is our chance to, step back and think a little holistically before we, I don't want, said another way, I don't want anyone to feel steamrolled here as we go forward.
Chris, I'd like to ask if we can have the revised documents with the 5% contingency, and then possibly look at what the furniture, the scope, with or without the additional scope numbers are. And then I just had a quick question. When we look at the soft costs, maybe Dave or Kevin, the spreadsheet, which has between 3 and 4 million on each of the schools, is there a cover sheet with like the overall costs? Because I thought I heard 7.4, but the numbers look like they're 3 or 4 million for each school. So I just want to understand where that is, and is that a part of the spreadsheet that Laurel had for the GMP?
Well, what I can tell you is that if you look at the very bottom of the summary sheet that Laurel had for the GMP, the total soft cost numbers that she has listed there, the 2,550,000 for Hindley, and across that line, that totals out to the 7,389,000. That is the summary that I currently have, but that includes the 4.5% contingency, not the 5.
And then that does not include furniture, correct?
No, it does include furniture, but it doesn't include the expanded scope of furniture.
You're correct.
Okay, but we need to revise that number. So we need to, we would look for, the committee will be looking for the revised numbers for both the soft costs and then the GMP based on the 5% contingency.
Right, and pending further discussions by Dr. Adley and Kevin, and then getting back to us. For now, we should have those numbers reflect just the base scope for FF&E, pending hearing more from Dr. Adley and Kevin.
Yeah, that's what I heard. And in that scenario, the soft cost number that we have should not change unless we decide to change the scope on the FF&E. And the only thing that will change at the bottom there is that owner's contingency will go from 4.5% to 5%. So when Laurel plugs in the 5% in the spreadsheet, it'll recalculate the correct number, which will be slightly higher than we saw.
Laurel, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Laurel.
because I was staring at my computer screen. That was the 101,125,697, but I'll reprint the PDF.
Yeah, if you can rerun that,
Thank
that
you.
summary and recirculate it, that would be great.
Yep.
I think given that we're pretty close to final product, is that something Laurel and Dave we could get on Friday? Just so the committee has time to study it and,
Are you referring to just the cost summary, or did you want all that backup that was talked about before, just all the bid backup?
Well, let me ask, what could be available when?
I can give you the cost summary right when we get done talking. If you want a little package, I'll just do that tomorrow morning.
Yeah, if you could do the bids, yeah, if you can get us the whole enchilada during the day tomorrow, that would be great.
Okay.
Laurel, so do you have what you need for the soft cost values?
I have the numbers that David Martin just mentioned, so I'm going to stay with those numbers.
Okay. That works for you, Dave?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else from the committee? Anything else people want to raise? Jill, anything that you think I missed?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Okay.
Alan has something. I see his hand.
Yeah.
You're on mute,
You're on
Alan.
mute, sir.
Yeah, just a we update on enrollment. We had the enrollment report presented to the board a few weeks ago. So looking at the new enrollment projections versus what was submitted as part of the educational specs, we are in very good shape. The one increase is at homes, and that's in 2029-30, but goes up to 24 classes, but we have 24 classes as part of the renovation. So there's literally very little impact, and any impact there was is accommodated. So that's a good thing. I'm still waiting back. The mold contact that I have in grants department has been silent on the 2 requests that I have out, which are basically about reimbursement, when we can either submit reimbursement or expect reimbursement, but we'll hopefully get an answer to those.
Alan, I would imagine we'll need backup by the 18th when we're up in front of the Board of Selectmen, and the or answers by the 18th when we're up in front of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. So if you need any backup from anybody, please give us a holler.
Yep, I'll do.
Okay, again, just a word of thanks to everybody who's on this Zoom for how hard everyone's been working to pull this together. We're on, surprise, surprise, we continue to be on a compressed timeline. So thank you, everybody, for all your super hard efforts, and we'll keep on keeping on. With that, can we get a motion to adjourn? Tom Harris moves, Jill seconds, all in favor. Great. Thanks again, everybody. We will meet again next week, December the 13th. Same time, same format. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.